I do want to acknowledge that while I'm up here on the podium, this was made possible by a number of people from NCSA. Jim Glasgow, our storage admin, is down here in the front row and is on the firing range for a lot of the solutions that will be presented here. And Galen Arnold is sitting next to him, who's the guy who, if you're trying to transfer in too many files to Nearline, he's pausing your tasks for you automatically. So he's our enforcer. So so what we're here to talk about is the process of getting your data that you want to keep out of our Nearline subsystem. We have a limited amount of time to do so, and there's a lot of data there. We don't know how much of it you still want to transfer. We have something around 35 petabytes and 355 million files sitting in Nearline today. At the moment, Nearline is scheduled to be turned off on December 19th along with the computation system. That really does mean turned off. It doesn't mean we're going to keep it around for another year for you to get your data out. So it is important for you to begin to move your data if you haven't already. We do have a pending supplement to extend that potentially for 3 more months, but only 3 more months. And that's intended to only cover people who are actually computing up until the end of December, to give them some time to move their data off-site for the regular 90-day grace period. We can help you, but it's your responsibility to do that data movement. So we can facilitate, but we need you have to be the ones out there moving the process forward and telling us and being responsive for what data needs to move. Sorry. Yes, sorry. Typo. It should be March of 20. Yeah, 3 more months after the end of compute operations. So some stats here. So this is what we see today with standard operations. If you're moving large files, and where large is say 100 gigabytes or more off tape, those stream pretty well. You can see streams move off at about 300 megabytes per second, which is pretty decent. It's about the tape speed, and you can stream that pretty much all day. And you can have 3 streams running at the same time to other endpoints if they've got enough bandwidth, such as tax endpoint. So that's the good. For small files in the 16 megabyte to 16 gigabyte range, the rate is really not measured in megabytes per second, it's measured in files per minute. And that's more like, if you're lucky, 1 file per minute, which if you've only got 10,000 of them, that's not so bad. If you've got 1 million of them, you can do the math. That isn't going to get you done by the end of December. So we have a problem there. Same story for really tiny files. We have a number of teams that have a lot of files below 16 megabytes. We are working on a solution that I'll talk about in a minute to that, but with the standard mode of operation, again, you can't get those off of the system in a reasonable amount of time. Probably many of us would be retired by the time you could get some teams could get their data off. So it is a big problem. So on the very small file problem, fortunately we have enough cache available or we're actually borrowing part of the home file system to load these files into what amounts to disk cache, and at that point it should be relatively achievable to download those files. We expect to have that done in a couple weeks, mid-June, some sort of time frame. Once we have that done, we will plan to send a note out to people, particularly teams that have large numbers of these very small files, to let you know it's better to, you can go ahead full bore to try to download those. We're not going to tell you not to do it now, but you'll get better performance once this gets done. I would note that probably most other sites that run tape archives would thank you if you move them somewhere and tar them up before you put them there. So that's something to keep in mind. The slightly larger file size, 16 megs to 16 gigs, we have something on the order of 23 petabytes. So this is most of our storage. And unfortunately, it's still too small to get good streaming performance from tape. Additionally, some of you who have been our very favorite users for the past 6 years have their data spread across more than 7,000 tapes, making this a big challenge to pull all your data off if you really want everything. We hope that if you're in this category, you're already moving data. We do have some ideas, and we're working on some strategies to make this faster, where faster is maybe a factor of 4 at the moment, not a factor of 100, which some teams may need. So we're still working on ways to try to make this more achievable. One of the things that would really help us is for everybody, and I'll talk again about this later, to go through and prune out anything they don't need. Right now we have a 23 petabyte problem, and that's bigger than we can handle. If you make it more tractable, it'll be much easier for us to find solutions. Craig?
So I just want to stress that what you mean by prune out is to go into the Globus file system either via the GUI or via the CLI, and within Nearline delete the files so that Nearline knows they are no longer necessary.
Correct. Delete the files. Anything you don't need or have already transferred. Large files, as I mentioned, they stream pretty well off tape. We do not think there's a need to change our standard mode of operation for those, so just make sure you give yourself enough time to actually make that transfer, which for most teams means you should be transferring now, not waiting till, if you think it's going to take a month to do, don't wait till December to start. We need to have as many people move their data as quickly as possible, because there are finite resources throughout the system. So I'll mention data repackaging, which I already started with. There's no need to do data repackaging for our purposes. You're moving the data off the system. However, as I mentioned, the site you're moving it to may impose either inode or file counts, or have some sort of other limits that require you to tar this up into a larger file to make it less of a burden on a resource like a tape system. If you no longer have computational access to Blue Waters, we are providing some small allocations to allow the use of a compute node for running tar and that sort of thing. I understand from Dan that he is willing to do the same at TAC, so it really doesn't matter too much to us whether you move it from data from Nearline to Blue Waters or Nearline to TAC. The slow step is getting it off tape, so it doesn't make a lot of difference what that remote disk endpoint is, as long as you're moving it somewhere reasonably performant. I'll note a couple things about moving your data along. For each endpoint, you can have 3 active data or 3 running data transfers. You can have more submitted, but only 3 will actually run. This is a Globus limit. And so it is good in general to have at least 3 running at all times to get maximum throughput, because you'll be able to parallelize as much as possible that process. You can submit more, but if you need to worry about repackaging, or you want to make sure you get certain tasks done before others, you may want to let us know. You can submit more, and we can administratively pause some until the high priority ones get done. Otherwise, whenever there's a hiccup on the system, Globus kind of rotates through each of the active transfers, and you end up with a bunch of them half done rather than any one of them getting done. So it just depends. If you're just moving between 2 endpoints and you don't really care which one gets done first, then there's not really any need to prioritize anything. But if you do care, let us know and we can help. The final point there is you need to monitor your transfers. Credentials expire on the endpoints, obviously. I believe Globus does email people when that happens, but we know a number of people don't seem to see those emails very promptly. Once your credentials expire, the transfers stall. So you're not making any progress if your transfers stall, and if you leave them stalled for more than 3 days, I think it is, the deadline will be hit on those transfers, and they'll actually be kicked out of the system. So you'll need to please watch your credentials. For Blue Waters, I think we have 7-day or 10-day credentials? 12-day credentials. Some sites, like some of the DOE sites, are only like 3 days. So you have to pay attention to how often each endpoint on there needs to be renewed. Storing data on Nearline. So that's not the main topic of this, but we do still allow people to store. The main point would be we're not really entertaining quota increases very much these days. So if you're going to have a very good and convincing reason why you want to put data into Nearline at this point, beyond the normal defaults. And we're trying to encourage people use best practices to store it in at least 100 gigabyte sized files. You can have a few that are smaller than that, but most of your data should be in large files. All right, general requests. Number one, I already mentioned, remove data after it's no longer needed. That helps us know how much data remains that you want to act upon, and it makes it easier all around for us to find solutions that might improve the performance of the overall problem. This is particularly the case in that 16 meg to 16 gigabyte file sized area. You can do the deletes yourself, either through the Globus interface, web interface, or through the CLI. If you have something that's a little more complicated, such as you would like to run a regex sort of expression to delete stuff, just open a ticket. We can take care of that behind the scenes and help you out with that. So we don't want lack of an easy interface to be an impediment to getting the job done. Then the next points are, we do want to help you get the data off you want, but to do that, we need you to respond to our needs for information promptly, and particularly some of these solutions are going to require handoff back and forth. So if we preach stage data, we need you to be responsive once it's in the cache to issuing the Globus transfer, to getting it out of cache off the system, and so forth, so that the data is not just sitting there. So timeliness is very important for both information for us and for responding to our requests. We are putting together an information page on the data retrieval. It's not completely fleshed out yet. These slides will be posted, so you can refer this page on Nearline or on the wiki when it's complete. On the portal, sorry. But if you have any questions or problems in general, as always, please open a ticket. Help plus Blue Waters will take care of that. We have a number of people that are looking at this right now. This is one of our highest priority items over the next few months, to try to help you get all the data you want off the system the best that we can. And with that, I'm going to switch to kind of showing you the nature of the problem by team. Maybe you don't want to see that, I don't know. Naming and shaming, so maybe that's going to work, maybe that's not going to work, I don't know. All right, well, my mouse is working. You can see the first page anyway. I don't know if I'm going to be able to move it after that, but so I've highlighted this small file count column here because that's the biggest pain point we have right now. It's not so much the file size, although that does impact things somewhat, but if you have more than 1 million of these size files, it's challenging. But right now, as I mentioned, you might get one file per minute per transfer, so that might be 3 per minute. We have, 250,000 minutes left before December, so you can do the math. At the current rate, we're not going to get 1 million files off for these projects. So that's why we need to take action to do some of these other mechanisms to try to improve that performance. So I'm not going to go through team by team, but hopefully you can actually see where your team lines up on here. So with that, let me see if there are any questions. I'd scroll through, but I seem to have locked up my machine at the moment, so I think I will leave it at that. So. Yeah, that might be. All right. Jeremy's got a question. Actually, he's probably got a comment, but.
It's a question. It's for the audience. Just kind of get a show of hands. How many in the room have data that they know they have a place for right now? They have a place to transfer it. If you're ready to transfer it today, how many have a place where you're ready to start? It's allocated. Exclamation point.
There we go.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to get a sense of that. So not everyone. We've got a feeling
Well,
about 50% there.
let's invert that question. How many do not know where they're moving the data that they'd want to move?
Yeah, so who has a big pile of data on Blue Waters Nearline that if you had a place to move it, you'd start moving it today, but right now you don't have any place to put it?
All right. Well,
One, okay.
one there anyway. So
All right.
I believe I heard Dan say this morning, and I confirmed. So So at the moment, Dan does have an offer on the table for anyone who's likely an allocation on tax system to move data into Ranch. So that does require talking to both us and TAC. They'll need to talk to TAC to get the allocation and get it set up, and we can help move data. So, other questions? Quiet bunch.
So I have a lot of small files, although I'm pretty low in the list. No, the list goes up.
List
Middle
goes
in
down
the
a
list,
ways,
okay. So one of the problem is I don't understand how to compress the file in Globus. Like, then I have
Yeah, there is no interface in Globus to do it. So in order to tar them up, you've got to load them onto some disk system, whether
Oh,
that's
so, like,
Blue
is it-
Waters or whether it's, as I mentioned, TAC may also have a system they could do that in. Basically, you have to stage them somewhere onto a disk system to do the tarring, and then you can load them to the other end.
So for the small file transfer, would you suggest, like, usually, say, in a folder, I have, say, 300 files, which are pretty small, and I have, like, 20 of these folders, just as an example, and that is, like, for one thing. And would you suggest, like, how should I do this transfer? Because as
Well, the first step is getting it off tape, and you can't really do much about it at this point. All you can
Okay.
do is transfer it as
just
it
the
is.
same transfer, like,
All you can do is do the same transfer as is right now, because there's no ability to repackage that data as it's sitting on tape.
Okay.
So you have to get it onto disk somewhere. And then before you stash it onto Ranch or somewhere else on tape, that's where you need to do the repackaging, before you do that. Because tape is a difficult thing to interact with.
And you're also doing, so I wanted to transfer a couple of files from another system to Blue Waters just momentarily. This is not for long-term storage or anything. And the jobs got paused because I was transferring small files. So for that, you would suggest like tarring the file in the other system and
That's
then
right.
transferring it to.
Tar it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Make it into a file that's on the order of 100 gigabytes, or if you tar it up and the whole thing is less than 100 gigabytes, fine, then put
Okay.
that one file in. But just don't put lots of little files in.
Okay.
As I said, Galen's enforcing that now, so we're limiting the ability of people to put in lots of small files. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So. Other questions?
So I'll make another comment. So several of you have JIRA tickets started that we're working with you on to start addressing this, and we've started a lot of those JIRA tickets on our end and identified some in a category that have a lot of these files in the class that are under 16 megabytes. And for those cases, as Brett had alluded to, we have a potential solution in the works that may be ready by mid-June for that. And so just connecting that, some of you have comments in those JIRA tickets saying, hurry up and wait until mid-June. And that, I'm just making that connection here. That's what that's waiting for, is for that solution to arrive. Whereas if you started rushing to the gates right now and making a run on the bank, it would not be as productive if you're in that category for the under 16 meg files as if you waited until we had this optimized solution ready in mid-June. In the tiny file category,
right.
that's correct.
That's this column, which I don't know how to select exactly, so I may have to.
So our hope is, if that solution works properly, that even many, many files in the tiny file category won't represent that much of a problem. As Brett alluded to, these 16 megabytes to 16 gigabytes file class, those are definitely a problem right now if there are millions of them, as there are. And we're hoping that either our resource availability goes up or the problem size gets reduced so that we can, over time, may be able to consider a similar type of online file system back cache pre-staged solution that we're going to do for the very tiny files. But right now, that is not even close to an option. So we really need your help to prune that out and identify what you don't need. And also importantly, when you move and transfer your files out, make sure you go clean up behind you. Because that will help with the remainder of what's left, and we can
possibly have that turned into a realistic end result by the time we're heading into the fall.
All right, questions? Sure. I think. How far down do I need to go? I didn't put all the names in, but once you get down in this region, I'm not particularly worried about you, except for maybe so like this one is still a problem. If you got lots of small files, again, once we get this loaded into cache, we think that'll be achievable. And this 13,000 is not a big deal. Even up to 100,000 is not really a big deal, but you get above that and it takes a lot of time. So
I was wondering if, shouldn't it be possible to kind of load that tape onto a disk, do the packaging and put it back on a tape, and therefore, so you eliminate the small size problem?
Yeah, but we don't have enough disk to cache the entire tape library.
No, I don't mean the whole thing, but like tape by tape or parts of the tape.
So that's essentially what we're doing. Well, what we're doing on the small files is loading it all into a disk cache. And you bulk load a tape, so you read the entire tape straight through. The problem is we don't have enough space for the larger file size class to do that anywhere. We might be able to eventually do individual sets of tapes, but it's hard to do that at some of these projects that the files are distributed over so many tapes that we don't have enough resources to load those in there. And it's not easy to pick out the tapes necessarily, so. Yeah,
Yep.
microphone.
So maybe I could address that a little bit too.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
so the issue with a solution like that is the way the data is distributed across the media within the system. It's not user or project organized. So it's just a mix of random files on a tape.
The way tape file systems work, if you have small files, they're likely to just tag along to the end of each individual tape.
Yes, which is super good for storage efficiency. So I'm assuming that the tiny file storage solution, you are going to have to spin every tape once, all the way through.
Right.
And then so we have enough disk cache that we can dump all the tiny files in one spot, and then everybody can just pull their tiny files off once that's done. The problem is the small files, we can't do that because it's 23 petabytes, and that's like twice as big as our scratch space, was our biggest data.
Well, it's bigger than our total scratch space.
Yeah.
It's not twice, but.
So the concern is actually that column is pretty close to the end of what Brett has on screen, which is
This one?
which is the total number of tapes that all of your data sits on. And so you'll see that there are people who are sitting on 7,000 tapes, and the thrash between each of those, having to just read through, will take so long that it's better if we clean up first.
Right. His suggestion would work, except each individual project is stratified across so many different tapes. So,
So
each tape holds many different projects.
So how long is it going to take to spin the tiny files? How long does it take to spin the entire through every tape in the system?
So try to give a little more context to this. The reason that we're talking about these file distributions is because of the way the data is stored within the system. So the data is laid out in particular classes of storage, and it's broken out into these different categories that Brett's got. The thing that we're doing by adding additional file-backed disk to the tape management system and storing the very smallest files into those is those files are already in a class of storage themselves. So we'll simply read every tape in that storage class from end to end sequentially and stage them all in the most efficient manner possible. So once a tape goes into a drive, we'll read it and we're done. There'll be no intermediate tape exchanges whatsoever. And that's the best that we can do to read those files from tape.
To put numbers to it.
To Craig's question, there's something on the order of 3,000 tapes in that class of storage. and we can read a tape in about 8 hours end to end. So we throw enough tape drives at it, and we're looking at a week to maybe 10 days to read all of that data.
Yeah, the reason that can be done with the tiny file class is because it represents about a half a petabyte, and we have that kind of free space on the online file system that we can then turn in, dedicate to a cache use, and we can move that all at once. And then the next storage class would have to be moved as it to a 22 petabyte of available space, which we don't have. So.
So what I take away from this is the most helpful thing we can do in the next 2 weeks is to remove files we do not need to have read.
Yep.
Yes, because that both helps us and it defines what, it defines the rest of the problem. So if, a third of the files on tape were all of a sudden just to disappear because people deleted them within the Nearline file system, that's a big, that would help take the load off. Dan, did you want to?
First of all, let me say that your file density per petabyte is actually 10 times better than ours for Exceed users on Ranch. So cheers for having bigger files than lots of people do. I think I figured our average file is about 20 megabytes, but our median file is like 4K, right? And it's the kilobyte files that really get, if you even have 100 megabytes per file, we're thrilled. But what you consider small, those are wonderful. Anyway, so thank you for doing a great job with that. But just another straw poll, how many people on this list here, we took how many people have a place to go. How many of you still need to move from Blue Waters to Ranch, to TAC, or planning on doing that? I know a number of projects already have, but show of hands? I only see 2, 3, somebody's trying to hide, and you're going to be 4. So not that many. So we may be part of the way through that point. It's just getting everybody else off.
There's at least one big one who's not here. That's in progress.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's 2 in your top 5 that I think have already moved a lot. So
Yeah, true.
So they may not be, we may be part of the way through that. So, and I told Bill Brett I will send you the list of people who we know have moved stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
And just to be clear, when people are moving stuff via Globus, we have an interface that lets us see that you have transfers active. We can see where they're going to. We can't see what you're moving. So we kind of know total volumes, but we don't know much about information about what you have moved. So therefore, we cannot see how much data you've moved already, representing as a total of what you have versus what remains to be done. So when we ask you questions, when you ask for help, please understand that we don't get to see everything that the Globus interface provides you to see.
So the lemma to my previous comment is after you move something and it's saved somewhere else, please delete it.
Correct as well.
Yep.
It's like you read that slide. Yes, so it was very helpful for us to reduce the size of the problem. If we get the small file size problem down to a manageable size that we can load into online disk cache somewhere, that's what we'll do. And at that point, it will hopefully speed up the remainder, but we're a long ways from that at the moment. All right, other questions? Hopefully everybody's starting transfers as we speak, so. Yeah, some people have been going for a while already, but just a reminder, even the large files, it takes time. So if you still have a lot of data to move, don't hesitate in starting. We'd much prefer to, let's just say we'd much prefer to empty the system early than have to turn it off and have people that are still screaming that they haven't got their data off. So, Carolyn?
Yeah.
I just want to share a piece of experience we made. So the recommendation on for the file size on Blue Waters was 100 gigabytes. So this is what we tarred, and now it turns out that so some of our data we want to move back to CERN. But the CERN tape system is that old. The maximum file size they recommend is 10 gigabyte. So we cannot directly transfer into the CERN tape. I just wanted to share that. We will find a way around. We will have to untar and repack probably.
All right, anyone else? All right, any last thoughts from anyone up here? All right.
My last thought is just to leave on a note of success imagination here, in that what is currently looking like an intractable problem, if we, as Brett said, if you do the math, some of these look completely impossible to actually get out. If we get cooperation and partnership from everyone, and that 16 meg to 16 gig class gets reduced in size significantly enough where it becomes a problem, or and I'm going to use the word if here a couple times. If the solution we're using for online disk-back cache works for the tiny files, which we'll validate this month, and if the size of the 16 meg to 16 gig file class becomes small enough to fit on our remaining available space of disk-back cache, this problem actually becomes tractable, and there actually is light at the end of the tunnel. We could actually move everything off in that condition. So there are a couple of major ifs there, but if those things happened, this is possible for everyone to get everything. And that's it.
All right. Well, we certainly hope that we can get all the data you want off. We just need your help to make that possible. So I think with that, we'll end, and everyone, oh, Bill wants to say something.
Darren used to track an inventory and put it in there about where the data is moving to, so I know some are moving to pack, but other places, value in doing that, so I know the sites that are playing in the community. Are we keeping that as a Jira ticket?
We have information in the tickets with the people we've already done. For the most part, the other endpoints don't make a lot of difference to us. I mean, I think for the most part, we're not seeing throttling based on endpoint. Is that fair to say? I mean, personal endpoints are different, but other regular managed endpoints, for the most part, I don't think we're seeing much of a difference between sites. Main difference is how often your credentials expire, I think.
The only real issues we have are sites in Europe or large distances outside the continental United States. The lengths can be problematic.
The other problem has been in the past, if you're transferring between two tape endpoints that don't have sufficient disk cache in between them, tape to tape is a little bit of a challenge at times, although I think we've resolved one of the problems that was causing that.
The other kind of fairly common issue are people running Globus Connect Personal on their laptops. And when they shut down or Windows updates or whatever, the endpoint just stops functioning. So having somebody pay attention, just like with credentials, that the endpoint's active.
Yep. No data transfers when your laptop's asleep.